Role-playing games have been one of the most consistently changing genres of the last few decades. From roots in point-and-click adventures to early turn-based 2D adventures on consoles, they've developed into the multifaceted titles that we see today. But what makes an RPG recommendable? And in a gaming industry where every other title has stats to grind and levels to gain, what makes a great, true RPG? I'm Scott from WhatCulture.com, and these are the 15 best RPGs of the decade. Number 15, Octopath Traveler. Square Enix, or Squaresoft at the time, were the unbridled kings of the 90s era RPG. And after more than a decade of big-budget HD bluster, Octopath Traveler saw them return to the pixelated delights of yesteryear. On its own merits, Octopath Traveler is a brilliant adventure. Instead of focusing on a single hero with a host of support characters, it manages to fit in 8 protagonists, all with individual, fleshed-out and well-written stories. All of these stories are intertwined, and the game is brought to life with snappy, enjoyable, almost rhythmic combat. The pace positively thunders along, especially once everyone's stories hit their stride. By the time you hit credits after close to 80 hours of game time, Octopath has taken you on a vast, epic, and memorable journey. Number 14, Final Fantasy XV. When Final Fantasy XV launched in 2016 after many delays, name changes, and gameplay formula overhauls, it was greeted with positivity and a warm reception, as fans accepted Square Enix's willingness to change. Granted, not everything hit the mark and an entire chapter had to be replaced, but if we're going to talk about what you can pick up and play today, Final Fantasy XV has a ton to offer. For one, there is a beautiful, whimsical meets industry world to explore, as you guide Prince Noctis and his friends across the continent to an arranged marriage. Things don't go as planned and sinister forces interrupt, but 15's heart is in the right place. From a car that plays old-school Final Fantasy soundtracks to flashy spectacle combat and bosses that tower out the screen, this is a high point for a main Final Fantasy that we haven't seen since Final Fantasy X. Number 13, XENOBLADE Chronicles. As a series, especially in Europe, Xenogears/Xenosaga was relatively unknown. However, it was 2010's XENOBLADE Chronicles that brought the whole thing into the spotlight. Set loosely in the same universe as its older namesakes, Chronicles continued the series' vast and elaborate way of storytelling, encompassed into a massive setting. Quite literally massive too, as the game takes place on the back of 2 continent-sized titans, both dormant after battle. Or at least that's what you think. To say any more would spoil the game, but suffice it to say it is a well-rounded story with characters that millions of fans fell in love with. Xenoblade Chronicles was a landmark title for both the Nintendo Wii and 3DS consoles, pushing them to their capacities to show off the stunning world it was set in. Number 12, Deus Ex: Human Revolution. It took 8 years to get a sequel to 2003's NAF Invisible War, but it was worth it. Eidos and Square Enix went back to the first game to see what made it great, taking as much inspiration as they could. And when 2011 rolled around, Human Revolution breathed new life into the world of cyber spies, human freedoms, and the technological revolution. A prequel to the original game, it shed more light on the fractal nature of enhanced cybernetics, the will of those who abuse this loss of humanity, and the hands that pull at the strings behind the scenes. All told, this new age Deus Ex created a wonderful experience where choice and playstyle really mattered. You had complete freedom to sleuth it up and be a ghost, or use explosive Typhoon technology to blast your way through every encounter. Number 11, Pillars of Eternity. Launched as a Kickstarter back in 2012 in an attempt to let Obsidian make a truly old-school pen-and-paper RPG, Pillars of Eternity stood and delivered at launch. Obsidian had long since proven themselves capable of holding their own in the genre many times before, and this was a legendary game dev plying their trade like masters of the craft. Unlike most isometric RPGs it was paying tribute to, though, XP for leveling didn't come from enemies, instead being locked behind quests. This leveled the playing field when it comes to builds, and meant that something like stealth could be just as viable as all-out melee. From swords and shields to going in spells blazing, this is just one example of Obsidian knowing exactly where changes to established tropes needed to be applied. Number 10, Divinity Original Sin. Much like Pillars of Eternity, Divinity is another great example of a Kickstarter done right. And Divinity is recommendable as hell. Also played in an isometric perspective, Divinity swaps real-time combat in favor of turn-based, much like the old Front Mission, Final Fantasy Tactics, or XCOM titles. This adds some nostalgic strategy to the modern-day version of the genre that we didn't know we needed, and it makes all encounters way more tactical. Original Sin takes the story standard of being the beholder of all things powerful and turns it on its head, seeing you hunt down various people who are abusing magic overall. None of this comes easy, and even the idea of carefully considered difficulty in an RPG this complex feels fresh and worthwhile. None of these quests come easy though, and even the idea of carefully considered difficulty in an RPG this complex feels notably fresh and worthwhile. Number 9. Persona 5. High school can be a rough place. Doubly so if you're juggling report deadlines with having to dive into the minds of criminals to defeat their most nefarious thoughts. As silent protagonist Joker and his band of phantom thieves, these events ultimately lead out of the school and into a world of political subterfuge, and then even more as the plot becomes full-on anime fun madness by its second half. The Persona series has always thrived on the abstract, but Persona 5 stepped things up in regards to stylish presentation, tactical shortcuts in battle, and tons of quality of life improvements to reach a much wider audience. With its throwback style of turn-based combat, a banging soundtrack, and a cast of punchy characters, if you can't get your hands on the immaculate Persona 4 as a starting point, dive the F into Persona 5. Number 8. The Outer Worlds. Yes, it's a triple bill for Obsidian this decade. As where Bethesda have only stumbled and struggled, Obsidian have gone from strength to strength. Not to mention plus 100 to integrity for not giving in to mobile games and aggressive microtransaction policies. The Outer Worlds then proves that Obsidian can take everything they learned from Fallout New Vegas, bugs and all, and channel it into a pristine barnstormer of an RPG. VAT-style slow-motion combat, an unbelievable amount of individual results for your character's interactions, and a world handcrafted from top to bottom to resonate with our currently fractured times. Outer Worlds was built to be everything you forgot you loved about last-generation RPGs. Number 7. Bravely Default. Another standout title for the 3DS, and not just because of the name. Bravely Default made waves by taking the typical local boy saves world with a band of colourful characters trope and turning that on its head. At least, that is how it starts, with you reactivating several magical MacGuffins to save the day, but that's not what it seems, and soon you discover there's way more shady dealings going on, making you wonder if you're actually doing the right thing. The battle system also shook things up. Whilst rooted in classic turn-based combat like the good old days of the 90s, the Brave and Default systems were a neat touch. Default allows you to stack turns, whilst Brave allows you to spend them all at once for one big attack. This 2012 RPG had all the looks of every other generic world-saving story, but once you delved into it, you were in for something special. It even continued with a sequel in 2016, cementing the series as two stellar offerings for the 3DS. Number 6. Kingdom Come: Deliverance. If you're looking for an old-fashioned, grounded RPG experience, look no further than Kingdom Come: Deliverance. There may be no dragons here or magic, but there's something altogether more rewarding. Deliverance gives you a well-crafted and surprisingly deep look into the lives and realm of the monarchs in 15th century Bohemia, which we now know as the Czech Republic. You start out as the son of a simple blacksmith, before antagonistic forces razed your town to the ground, setting off a tale of revenge, united fronts, and warring kingdoms. What makes Kingdom Come so great was the sheer wealth of customization and detail put into the characters and the world itself. Clothing deteriorates, food and water intake must be looked after, as well as dialogue choices having real heft and meaning to everything you say. It is by no means a quick game, whilst its combat system does take some time to get used to. However, if you're willing to put the time into Kingdom Come, there is a grand adventure just waiting to be explored. Number 5. Fallout New Vegas. It's safe to say that nobody was expecting Fallout New Vegas to be as good as it was. Announced a short time after the series reinventing third installment, many people took this to be Fallout 3 Lite, a quick cash-in at full price for half the content. But that assumption could not be more wrong. Whilst Fallout 3 was a cracking yet slightly cracked game, New Vegas brought more colour and life into the series. While still a barren locale overall, the colourful hub towns and stations brought some life and levity into the mix, which players were in dire need of. Featuring an eclectic mix of characters in a grand setting, New Vegas brought more choice to the player than just save the world. Taking sides actually had weight and consequence, with nothing being so black and white. With several factions fighting for dominance, their motives all part of some grander plot, it added a wider sense of drive and causality to every one of your actions. Number 4. Dark Souls. The impact of From Software's hack-and-slash masterpiece is felt more through difficulty curves and considered over-shoulder combat. However, that overlooks the fact that it's a damn fine RPG, with a staggering amount of customization options. Future installments would refine class builds, and things like Bloodborne or Sekiro would almost ditch them entirely, but 2011's Dark Souls lets you do everything from don mage robes to fire great arrows or fireballs across the battlefield, to wielding hulking greatswords, falling back for bow and arrow chip damage, or just relying on a trusty sword and shield combo. Its world is dreamlike and interpretational, the lore hidden in item descriptions and NPC dialogue, but in terms of role-playing and reward, Dark Souls is one of the very best. Number 3, Mass Effect 2. It's almost an unwritten rule in gaming that the second time is the charm. After developers have gotten their heads around game engines, become familiar with characters, and seen feedback from a few million of us getting in touch, that sophomore installment tends to fire on all cylinders. Such is definitely the case with Mass Effect 2, an exemplary offering from an exemplary studio, and still one of BioWare's all-time best. Taking the spacefaring formula of the first game and expanding on the mythos, introducing new characters good and bad, building to one of the best game endings ever. Throughout Mass Effect 2, you're warned of the consequences of your actions, which becomes immediately apparent in the now famous suicide mission that comes at the very end of the game. Have you been a benevolent and caring leader making the right choices, or did you only act for yourself and damn everyone else? All of these will show in one of the finest examples of peak BioWare, before the dark times of what came next. Number 2, The Elder Scrolls V, Skyrim. Much like Fallout 3 and New Vegas injected some life into the sci-fi setting of RPGs, Skyrim did so for fantasy, and then some. Yes, we've had a whole bunch of ports and remasters to every single console under the sun, but more content is always provided thanks to a thriving modding community, even on consoles. Skyrim offers massive scope and redefined what could be done at the time. Sure, it was buggy, but the potential far outweighed that. Here was a game with near limitless potential however you wanted to play. You could be the stalwart Dragonborn hero and save the land, or you could just shout a bunch of old ladies off cliffs. You can even become a homeowner if none of that sounds appealing, or a member of the vampire community. The possibilities here were staggering, and that's before you add on a phenomenal score, solid continued world building, and stellar overall direction. And number 1, The Witcher 3, Wild Hunt. Another series that started off a pebble before becoming the landslide that it is today, the Witcher series is a testament to perseverance. Rightly so, as Wild Hunt is one of, if not the best example of narrative in an open-world RPG. Many an accolade was showered on the game upon release, but it only went from strength to strength within its first year, largely in part to its additional DLC campaigns, which were more than simple endgame fanservice, instead being fully fledged stories that bolstered the already massive world that Geralt inhabits. Now, I won't spoil the tale of Ciri, the next-in-line queen, or these exemplary add-on packs, short of saying that you really should go play them. I've sunk over 600 hours into The Witcher 3, and I'm gonna go back for more. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt proved that games could have depth on a broader scale, that Bethesda weren't the only ones that could do hyper-detailed mythical worlds, and that Geralt is the best damn RPG protagonist of all time. At least, that's what I think. You've got a whole bunch of games to pick from when we're talking about the best RPGs of the decade, so let me know your favorites down in the comments below. For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com. Please check out the WhatCulture Gaming Podcast, and I'll catch you soon.